Hi folks, welcome back, and today I think I'm going to put the cat among the pigeons because I'm putting forward my theory that actually atheism, although it is generally considered to be more scientific than belief in deity or any other kind of faith, actually isn't really the truly scientific approach, and that there is a better approach to faith if you're being truly scientific. Now, I'm sure some people are already getting ready on their keyboards to write some comments, and you'll be welcome to at the end, but hear me out first. What this argument seems to rely on is that you've got atheism and you've got faith, and that the assumption is if one is correct, the other is wrong. But the fallacy here is to assume that by disproving one argument, you're proving the other one. That's not the case. And there's a very good reason why that's not the case. And that is because actually these are two separate suggestions. They are two separate hypotheses. Now, if we're looking at this in a scientific way, we can think of the two scientific hypotheses being there is evidence that God exists, or there is evidence that God does not exist. How have I come to that conclusion? Well, science is all about evidence. It's trying to find evidence that supports a theory. Or at least that's the common sense understanding of it. If we're being really true to what science is actually about taking a theory, trying to disprove it by testing and testing and testing, and if you can't disprove it, you accept it. Watch my video on the falsification symposium if you want to find out more about that. It's really interesting. But that's the scientific method as laid out by Karl Popper. And actually, that's correct. That's how science works. You have a hypothesis, you test it, you test it, you test it, and if you find any evidence that doesn't support your theory, you have to reject it. You accept instead what's called the null hypothesis. Now, if you do maths or have any links to science, then you'll know that the null hypothesis is like if the hypothesis is, I believe that this is the case, the null hypothesis is, there is no evidence that this is the case. So the null hypothesis is really the opposite of your hypothesis. Okay? Fair enough. So why do I mention this? Well, let's go back to that question of God exists, God doesn't exist. These aren't a hypothesis and a null hypothesis, as is often framed. You know, atheism is normally framed as a null hypothesis, but it's not. Atheism is not a null hypothesis. The hypothesis for God's existence is there is evidence that God exists. The null hypothesis is there is no evidence that God exists. Atheism is similar but not the same, because atheism isn't claiming there is no evidence that God exists. Atheism takes it a step further and says there is evidence that God does not exist. You don't believe me? Well, think about it. An atheist position is one of saying God doesn't exist. They're actually saying, I believe that God does not exist. And that means that their null hypothesis is there is no evidence that God doesn't exist. In order to make the claim that God doesn't exist, you need to have evidence. You need to have some sort of evidence to back that up. And you see this quite a lot in arguments about, God's existence, that the side who have faith will say, we believe that God exists because of all of these things in the world. The atheist side will say, we believe that God doesn't exist because of all of these things. So it is actually how the argument goes. But as I said, it's a fallacy to believe that by disproving one, you're proving the other. We need to look at these as two hypotheses. And this is where I'm really going to be controversial, because we all know that those who believe in God have got faith. Faith is believing in something despite a lack of evidence. I would argue atheists are exactly the same. They believe despite the lack of evidence. Okay, Hear me out. Let me explain. Further, the evidence that we've got for God's existence is soft at best. You've got things like the design argument, the cosmological argument, religious experiences. These are even the ontological argument, heaven help us. And all of these provide some level of evidence, but you can't look out your window and see God. You know, we are still unaware of where the universe came from. We cannot know. It's just beyond logical possibility. So, I would argue, you can't really suggest there's hard evidence for God's existence. Alright, but let's have a look at the atheist position. They're saying, well, there's suffering in the world, there's evil in the world, there's all of the principles of the universe that we know could explain instead of God. But at the same time as the person with faith can't look out the window and see that there's God, atheists can't go and prove that there is no God, because, again, it's unknowable, it's beyond our logical capability. They have to go into the realm of faith. They have to have faith that there is no God. So both sides really have only got soft evidence to support their claims. So, let's run the hypothesis test. There is enough evidence to believe in God. I would accept the null hypothesis. There is not enough evidence to believe in God's existence. Let's check out the atheist side. There is evidence to believe there is no God. Well, let's say actually, no, I'm going to have to reject that. I'm going to have to accept the null hypothesis. The null hypothesis saying there is not enough evidence to show that there is no God. So where does that leave us? Well, we've got around the fallacious argument, and we've applied true scientific method, and we've taken both, tested them, and we're accepting both null hypotheses. So, the truly scientific approach, to me, would appear to be agnosticism. Agnosticism is generally sort of portrayed in common culture as being not knowing whether God exists or not. But if we actually looked at it in a more detailed way, agnosticism is the belief that it's impossible to know either way. And it would be foolish to try, essentially. And I think that's the truly scientific way. They're going, look, we're never going to get the evidence for either of these two hypotheses. It just can't be done. The only thing that we can scientifically say is we do not know. Now, if you feel that the scientific method leads you towards one side or the other being more likely, then that is up to you, and you are welcome to that belief, but it is important to recognise that they are just beliefs. All that we can know is that we can't know, which seems to me to be agnosticism. Now, I'm sure that this will bring about plenty of comments and plenty of discussion, and if you have them, please put them below. You know, I am really keen to hear what you've got to say. Keep it clean and respectful, of course, but I would like to know what you think. Anyway, hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching. See you next time.